Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it is just past midnight on Tuesday, September the 9th, which makes this the news and events for Monday, September 8th, day 1293 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. How do you do? I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv, coming to you live from this major European capital currently under siege. I see the peeps are coming in. There's Betty Thompson. How you doing, Betty? Hey, how are you doing, Anthony Tommy Tom? Nice to see you. Super user, nice to see you. Hey, Tommy Weber. How you doing, bud? Evening, Steve. Hey, Pugga Mahone. Little Red. Hey, Feisty. Hey, Jan. Evening, Jackie. Hey, Steve. Andrew. Esteban. How you doing, pal? Hey, Derek Sands. Nightshade, Seawolf. Richard Prexis. I do not see our sponsor, Jeeps for Peace. You know, guys, I don't get involved in a lot of fundraising, right? I usually point people to United 24, and then a couple of other organizations that people I know, right? The Jeeps for Peace guys do a lot of good work, boy. I highly recommend, if you can support them, to support them. Hey, Scotty. How is everybody tonight? It's a Monday, right? Everybody tired from their weekend. I was exhausted, I'll be honest. Friday night, we had this huge drone attack, the largest single drone attack of the war, over 800 drones fired at the territory of Ukraine. And so nobody got any sleep on Friday night. And then Saturday, we had our last barbecue of the summer, and that's all day. And so Sunday and Monday today, I was just worthless. I'm just worthless now. Hey, Chrissy Locks. So Friday night, we did see the largest single drone attack of the war. 810 drones fired at the territory of Ukraine. 747 of them intercepted, either shot down or taken out with electronic warfare. That's a 92% interception rate on the drones. Incredible work by the mobile defense units and the Air Force and everybody involved in that process. Crimson One is asking the question, what about those Russian threats of nuclear war? Would anyone like to answer, Crimson One? Can anybody tell me how much money is the Russian Federation spending this year to frighten Westerners like Crimson One into believing that Russia is going to fire a nuclear weapon? Does anybody remember? How much money is Russia spending this year on a disinformation campaign to convince us all that they're ready to go nuclear? Hey, Bjorn. Nobody remembers this? Too much. Well, Sandra, that's a matter of opinion. To the Russians, it's money well spent. That's a great question, Anthony Tommy Tom, that nobody knows the answer to. No, they don't have that much money, Little Red. The budget is $400 million. So we are aware, hey, Jay, and Westerners are scared. Yes, my son is a victim of this propaganda. He's worried that the Russians are going to nuke us all. And it's nonsense. And I'll tell you why it's nonsense. Because if you're going to nuke somebody, you nuke them and you don't say anything about it until after it's over, right? Like we did with the Japanese. That's what you do. You don't threaten it and never do it. And you certainly don't spend $400 million convincing people that you're going to do it if you're going to do it. You just do it. So, Crimson, you are the victim of Russian disinformation and propaganda. That is not a thing. And certainly, even if it were, if the Russians were really going to do it, we can't live in fear of it. We can't let that fear define how we're going to proceed. The Russians trying to overwhelm air defenses with drones so that more missiles get through. Yes. Yes, that's exactly what they're doing. And in fact, it's a good point to make, Andrew, that of the 13 missiles that they sent on Friday, 9 of them did get through. So it does work. It does work. And that's an important point to make. However, I also want to make the point. 800 drones, 13 missiles. Each one of those missiles costs over $1 million a piece. The Iskander M's cost $2 million a piece. And they unalived 4 Ukrainians. Another 44 or so were injured. 3 of those deaths were here in Kyiv. 2 women, and one of those women's infant child. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars to try to destroy the Ukrainian will to fight. And all they managed to do was murder some innocent women and children. That death toll may yet rise because of the attack. A pregnant woman was injured. She and her, and now this is according to the Kyiv Post, who was quoting reporting in Suspline. That mother and baby are currently in the hospital in serious condition, and the doctors are fighting to save their lives. So, hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $1 billion night. And what was the outcome? Ukrainians in the subways singing the national anthem. Russia is a one-trick pony. All that they can do is pour men into the meat grinder and try to break the will of the Ukrainian people with the civilian attacks. And neither of those things is working. I want to highlight that. And in just a minute, we will talk about the myth of Russian advances. We'll talk about that coming right up. Now, last night we saw just 142 drones, which is crazy to say, right? Just 142 drones. But I slept like a baby last night. 112 of the 142 taken out. That's about an 80% interception rate. As part of the weekend attacks, the cabinet minister's building was struck by a drone for the first time in the war, specifically the prime minister's office. So now the Russians are claiming that the drone was set off course by Ukrainian electronic warfare. And I mean, honestly, it's not impossible that that is the case. We don't really know. There are also some accounts that say that a drone did not hit the prime minister's office, but rather debris from a falling drone hit the office. Oh, Odessa got hit bad on Friday. Were you in Odessa on Friday, Andreas? Were you still down there? Odessa was hit badly on Friday, as was Sumy, as was Kharkiv, as was Mykolaiv, as was Dnipro. 810 drones, 13 missiles. It was bad night. Now, I want to talk about 2 things. One is the myth of Russian advances. That's one topic I want to cover. Then the other topic I want to cover is a bit of common wisdom. One of the things that we see throughout the course of this war is that as the war changes, our understanding of what's happening changes. And I don't know who first said this. I heard it, the first people I heard it from included Ben Hodges, Mark Galeotti, who's a defense expert at King's College in London, and Cormac Smith, who's a long-standing diplomat. He was a British diplomat embedded with the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, the first foreigner to be in that position ever from 2016 to 2018. And since the start of the full-scale invasion, his interviews are everywhere. He's probably conducted 300 plus interviews on the war. So if you've never heard of Cormac Smith, he's certainly a person to look for. He's intelligent, he's insightful, and he's well-versed in the Ukraine-Russia history. He is not easily dissuaded by Russian lies and propaganda, right? He's a guy who knows. And I don't know which one of them said it first, but now it's everywhere. Everybody has done a video about this. How Ukraine has turned Russia's greatest strength into their greatest liability. What is Russia's greatest strength? That they are so freaking big. How can that be? All that size, all that mass. How can that possibly be a liability? Because they can't defend it all. They simply cannot defend it all. The pipeline, the oil pipelines that run from the Siberian oil fields all the way to Europe, what they call the Iron Horse, has expanses thousands of miles long where there is no security, there is no protection. They don't any longer have the air defense to put air defense units at every oil refinery. That is not a thing. And we are watching the Ukrainians degrade that performance over and over and over again. And we'll talk about some of the details of that coming right up here. But first, I want to talk about the myth of Russian gains. Now look, Russia right now controls 19.2% of Ukraine. 19.2%. Like Adam Kinzinger says, could you imagine if the United States invaded Iraq and after 3.5 years of war, controlled less than 20% of the country, had 1 million casualties, and was still facing ongoing opposition, couldn't make any headway on the front lines? None of us would think we were winning, but boy, the Russians do. It is astonishing to me that it took the Russians 26 months to go from controlling 18% of Ukraine to controlling 19.2% of Ukraine. 1% of the country they added in over 2 years of fighting, and 750,000 casualties for that 1%. Now, in August, the percentage actually dropped. According to General Syrskyi, and this is confirmed by some other sources, the Russians all up lost 58 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory last month, in the month of August. And in September, early September now, we are watching the Ukrainians chip away at Russian positions around the most fortified and active area of the front, Pokrovsk. As the Ukrainians get wise to infiltration group strategy and eliminate invaders before they even get to the contact line. So this notion that Russia is just grinding forward, while it's true on the smallest possible scale, because at the current rate of advance, it would take Russia over 120 years to take the rest of the country. And 60 million lives. It's ridiculous that these people think that they are winning, but they do. And we will talk more about that in 1 second. First, let's take a look at some of the hits over the weekend. In Krasnodar, we saw the Ilsky oil refinery hit. This is a small 3.6 million ton refinery, 3.6 million tons a year refinery that supplies the Russian southern military district. Now, the Russian authorities are saying that a technological workshop was damaged by falling debris, right? Because, of course, the drones didn't hit the oil refinery, just the falling debris. Ukrainian SBU has a different story to tell. They say that they hit the AT6 unit, which is the primary processing unit of this smaller refinery. It's number 20. It's the 26th largest refinery inside of Russia. Not like Ryazan, which was also hit over the weekend, which is responsible for 7% of Russia's refining capacity. Now, we've had 15 refinery strikes on 10 unique refineries in the last 30 days. That's one strike every other day. The estimates of reduced capacity range anywhere from 20 to 27%, with most analysts agreeing that now Russian refining capacity is down somewhere in the 23 to 27% rate. That's 1 out of 4 gallons of gas they're not refining. Is it any wonder that you can't buy 95? Let's call it 95 octane. For those of us from America will understand that. It's their A95. You can't get it in Moscow. In Moscow. That's a change in this war. That's a change in this war. Little Red is saying she saw a video of 120 cars in line at the gas station. This is increasingly common. And consumer rationing is spreading. Now that they hit the main pipeline that supplies fuel to Moscow, and they're running out of fuel types in Moscow, Moscow residents are restricted to 10 liters of gas a day. 10 liters of gas a day in Moscow. Telegram channels are full of people making videos while they're sitting in line waiting for their gas, saying that it reminds them of Soviet times. And not in a good way. This is not a nostalgia bin that they're on. Not in the least. In Bryansk, a Druzhba pipeline transfer station that pipes oil to Belarus was hit. Now, the Russians, through that pipeline, pipe 10 million tons of oil to Belarus every year, much of which gets refined and then sold back to Moscow. Well, that pipeline is now shut down. It appears to be completely shut down. When it's going to reopen is anybody's guess. So this is not going to just hit external refining capacity in Belarus. It's going to affect what refined oil products get shipped back to Russia, exacerbating shortages that already exist. I can't imagine that it's going to be good for the Belarusians either. They're going to start experiencing the same kind of critical refined oil products shortages that Russia is currently deeply experiencing. And that is the key, right? Like that is the key to ending the Russian Federation. Shutting down the economy by right? It's a gas station with nukes, Russia. It's not a country. It's a mafioso gangland of gas stations with nukes. What do you have if there's no gas left? And that's what the Ukrainians are doing. Now, you guys know I love that Steve Rosenberg, the BBC Russia editor that's in Moscow. I love this guy. He's brilliant, insightful, 20 years inside Russia, speaks Russian fluently, and can talk to the Russian people. He took a trip out to Vladivostok this week. The video is on YouTube. I recommend you follow Steve Rosenberg if you want to know what's happening inside Russia. He has the most astonishing interviews on the subject of the Russians think they're winning. It's unreal. He interviewed a hockey team out in Vladivostok. They're hoping to be in the Paralympics. They're all amputees or multiple amputees who play ice hockey. And they're hoping to be in the Paralympics. Unfortunately, the Russians are not invited to those things because they're a terrorist state waging war on their neighbors. And they shouldn't be allowed to play our civilized reindeer games if they're going to keep up their shit, right? So he has this conversation. He's way the fuck out there in Vladivostok, 11 time zones away from Kaliningrad, talking to these multiple amputees who are Russian veterans who lost their limbs in the war. And what does the one guy say? He says, victory is inevitable. We contributed to the victory, and the guys coming after us will contribute to the victory. I mean, he's sitting there with no leg, and he's still talking about victory and the inevitability of Russian victory. Out in the street, Steve Rosenberg was conducting street interviews with people, and a guy approaches him very aggressively and accuses him of asking Herr Putin a very provocative question, which in my mind, of course, is the job of the press. But it is frowned upon in these autocratic nightmare states like Russia. So the guy gets in Rosenberg's face, and he's telling Rosenberg that he doesn't know shit, that we just saw China and India and Russia standing together, shoulder to shoulder in Beijing. No France, no Germany, no UK. Their power is over. It is the time of the autocrats, is what Victor had to say to Steve Rosenberg. Russians believe they are winning. Russians believe that they cannot be defeated. That is very clear from all of these conversations that Rosenberg is having with these guys. In the Russian papers in Moscow, Smolensk, there was a picture of a tiger, a bear, and a panda all seated around the table together with the American eagle outside looking in. And the paper wrote, "The age of global liberalism is a spent force." Or rather, global liberalism is a spent force. Trump wants to preserve a place for the U.S. in a multipolar world, right? So this is them saying that Trump knows the United States is irrelevant these days, and he wants to preserve a place for it in the multipolar world. It is so frustrating to me as an American to watch us give up our leadership in the world so that we can reduce ourselves to sitting at a table with a bunch of murderous war criminals who think that they should live to 150 years if they can just sacrifice enough prisoners for their organ transplants to make themselves immortal. Trump wants to preserve a place for the U.S. in a multipolar world. After the parade in Beijing and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, you have to be blind not to see the truth, they wrote. The paper went on. Europe and Kyiv are responsible for the war in Ukraine. Europe wants the fighting to continue to drain Russia of resources. Kosmovskaya Pravda wrote, the old world plans to weaken Moscow via the conflict with Ukraine and join the conflict itself. The year is already set, 2030. Europe is crazy for war with Russia. Now, we see this we see the papers say these things. Place the blame for the war on NATO, on Europe, on the US, in complete contradiction to the reality. Moscow blames the world for their aggression, and the Russian people not only believe it, they must believe it. To deny Russian invincibility is treason, and they are brainwashed into this belief. It is going to be, when the flamingos finally rain down on Red Square, when the Russian army finally turns its guns on the real oppressor in the Kremlin, it will be a moment of such shocking cognitive dissonance, the likes of which the world has not seen since the Japanese had to give up the notion that their emperor was a god, or that the Nazis in Germany had to give up the notion that they were the master race. I cannot imagine that the Russian Federation will do anything but degenerate into an orgy of violence, the likes of which we have not seen since Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, really, Europe is so crazy for war. Why the fuck aren't they here helping? That would be nice. Moskovsky Kommersants also talked about economic outlook. The budget deficit is becoming a real problem for Moscow, quote unquote. RBK, which is like the Economist or the Wall Street Journal inside Russia, published the results of a survey of 450,000 entrepreneurs inside Russia. Of those 450,000, 49% said that they had to cut staff in the last year, so nearly half. 57% said that they believe the oncoming year will worsen, that the economic outlook will worsen, nearly 60%. 62% said that they are losing money on sanctions, that friendly countries have not made up their sanctions losses, 62%. While 90% said that new partners and new suppliers had to be acquired to combat the sanctions routine. Kommersant reports on a new IPO due shortly. Are you ready for this? Can you guess what business the company that's about to offer its stock for sale to the Russian market is in? And that was lauded as a real forward-looking growth business? Bionic Limbs, a prosthetics company. The future of the Russian economy is in prosthetics and black veils, apparently. Now, I did a video about this. It is the most amazing thing. So everybody knows what a Book M2 is, right? It's the mainstay mid-range SAM system of the Russian Federation. Surface-to-air missile, air defense missile, right? Good point, Michael. The Russians had 310 in service at the start of the war. According to War Spotting, at least 134 have been destroyed. That's well over a third. And War Spotting is good because it only counts if they have evidence of it, right? So the number is probably much larger. It's probably closer to half of these destroyed. In fact, we saw video of 2 new ones destroyed over the weekend. One was just a HIMARS strike. The HIMARS took out a Book M1 somewhere in the east. But then there was another one in Donetsk, and this was the most amazing thing to watch the videos. In the first video, the spotter drone is watching the Book drive into a warehouse where it's under a concrete roof, right? And it's safe in there, let's say. They think they're safe in there. Then we see the spotter drone call in the strike. And we see a one-way drone hit the roof, explode, knock a big hole in the roof so that the next drone can get in and hit the book. Well, the crew was not waiting around for that second drone. They hop in the book. They drive off, right? They're going to get it to a safe location. Spotter drone starts following, but the battery warning light is coming on. So the operators land the spotter drone on the book as it's racing away so that they can continue to track it with the GPS on the drone. Amazing. It's about 30 minutes later, a new drone has been dispatched. It hits the book, and you have one of those fantastic book cook-offs because the thing is loaded with rockets, right? And so you have this incredible cook-off in the dark forest lane where it was finally tracked down. Just incredible work by the Ukrainians. Really great to see. And we're probably very close to fully half of all of those air defense systems eliminated. You guys know I have the utmost respect for the partisans who live and work behind enemy lines, who risk their lives every day to get the coordinates of Russian troop concentrations or movements of Russian troops or high-level cabinet meetings of officers back to the Ukrainians so that they can be targeted with precision, with fatal precision. Well, over the weekend, one kid was busy. How gratifying. Nice, TKS Daddy. Very, very nice, pal. Anti-Smersh. Anti-Smersh is a partisan group. We talk a lot about Atesh and the I in here. Anti-Smersh is one to know as well. These guys are particularly active in the temporarily occupied territories, especially Crimea. And it looks like one kid went out over the weekend and burned 4 railway relay cabinets in the area of Simferopol. Now look, Simferopol is right next to Sevastopol, which is where all the Russian Navy brass used to be stationed, where all the GRU are stationed now and FSB are stationed now. So this kid is right in the heart of enemy territory, and he's going around lighting up railway relay cabinets. Incredible. Now, it is important to recognize that, right, with the railway cabinets gone, with the relay cabinets gone, all of your automated track switching is offline. Which means if you got to switch a track for a train, somebody's got to go out there and actually pull the lever and move the track. That slows shit down. That slows everything down. And it slows, in particular, when we're talking about Crimea and Simferopol, it slows all the supplies headed to Jankoy for redistribution to the front. That's good news for everybody. But more importantly, I think that we want to recognize that this also diverts resources. It takes up the time of engineers to repair those cabinets. It takes up security resources who could be guarding ammo dumps or other more critical facilities, but now they got to put somebody on the railway cabinets to make sure that they aren't getting burned over the course of the weekend. Additionally, these kinds of visible sabotage are a powerful reminder to the occupiers that they are not safe, that they are on enemy territory. They are surrounded by their enemies, and they don't know which one of the locals or even one of the people in their own ranks are secretly working to sabotage them every single day. You don't know who the enemy is. And that kind of paranoia is exactly what Ukraine wants to engender in the Russian Federation forces. Turn them against each other. like we're seeing with the military purge that the FSB is currently conducting. Now in Sumy, I thought Sumy was going better than it was. It looks like things have changed a little bit over the weekend. Sumy, there's two basic fronts. There's an easterly front and a westerly front. And the westerly front is taking a pounding from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are pushing them back. They're going to be back in Russia soon, it looks like. The eastern front, the Russians are pushing forward. So it's like this, right? The Ukrainians are pushing them back on the west, but the Russians are pushing forward on the east. A kind of weird, violent yin-yang. We are now 16 months since the Russians came over the border in Vovchansk. And the situation there has deteriorated from a coherent garrison to disconnected infiltration groups hiding in the rubble. They're going nowhere. And they're going nowhere fast. In the Dobropilla sector, right? So this is just northeast of Pokrovsk, where we saw that bunny ears advance that essentially, it appears, was a trap that the Ukrainians went in and cut off and isolated several thousand Russian troops with nowhere to run to, no way to get supplies or resupplied. They're just cornered there. And look, I'm not saying that the Ukrainians are using those isolated troops as bait to set up a kill zone where they're just destroying everyone that comes to try to rescue them. But that is the practical upshot of what's happened. Last Friday, I reported on a large armored column and 100 men destroyed trying to get to those troops to rescue them. The same thing happened 2 more times over the weekend. They're just decimating them in the rear before they can even get to the contact line. Now, how are they able to do this? Well, we don't really know, but the Telegram channel Exile Nova Plus published video that they claim were Ukrainian hackers who had hacked the CCTV all over Donetsk. And that basically the Ukrainians are watching the Russians on, CCTV. They know exactly where they are. And they're using that information to destroy them before they reach the contact line. Now, why the Ukrainians would want us to know about this, or would want the Russians to know that they hacked the CCTV, is a good question to ask, because normally you wouldn't want the enemy to know that. You'd want to keep that shit to yourself. So my question is, do you think that the Ukrainians want the Russians to know to engender more of this paranoia, more of this fear, or were they discovered by the Russians and kicked out? And so now they can kind of brag a little bit to the world and say, hey, we did this, right? And we're going to do it again. But it doesn't matter if the Russians know, because the Russians already know. That's my question. And the fact is, I don't have an answer, right? This is just speculation as to why they might have released this information. Let's see. The Russians are claiming that in that sector, there are 5 drones in the air for every soldier that they have, which is interesting. Complaints from water-scarce Donetsk residents have been met with threats of arrest for dissent from the party officials in Donetsk, who insist that everything is fine. I mean, it's real Soviet times coming to Donetsk. This is what they voted for, right? And so this is what they're getting. They've got an incompetent leadership who has failed to address the basic needs of the people to have clean, potable water. And rather than listen to their complaints and do something about it, they're telling them to be fucking quiet and not say a word, or they're going to get arrested. This was from the head of the Russia United Party in Donetsk at a conference over the weekend. Now, a Russian Gabera has landed in Poland, a Russia Gabera drone. It's got a date on it of 02.09, which would be September 2nd. It was authorized for combat missions. So this may have come down, it may have been launched as part of the big September 3rd attack. That was a big attack, like 500 drones that night. And it was just found over the weekend in Poland, exploded on the ground. Thank God, no casualties, no property damage. But it is a worrying trend. And one does wonder, was it just another accident or electronic warfare off kilter? Or is Russia pushing NATO's buttons, testing the limits of what is an Article 5 violation? Because apparently you can use electronic warfare against Ursula von der Leyen's plane, and that's not an attack on NATO. Because that just happened last week, right? So while Russia is falling apart, and it really is, no matter what the people there think is going on, Ukraine continues to look to the future. And that is Ukraine's great strength in all of this, is that they've got a long-term view of this war. And nobody expects this war to be over anytime soon. Taiwan, so at the International Defense Industry Exhibition in Poland last week, Taiwan and Ukraine have agreed to collaborate on UAV production, and they have signed a memoranda of understanding with, are you ready for this? Get this name. The Taiwan Excellence Drone International Business Operations Alliance. I'll tell you, the Chinese come up with the craziest names for things. I mean, it's really, really crazy. So the Taiwan Excellence Drone International Business Opportunities Alliance has signed a memorandum of understanding with the UA Tech Cluster Iron Lviv. There's also been agreements for joint manufacture of marine drones to defend the Philippines. It's unclear whether these will be built in the Philippines or built here, but there does seem to be movement in the direction of a memoranda of understanding expected to be signed in October that will focus on drone co-production, specifically unmanned surface vehicles that the Philippines will use to defend itself from China, right? In that South China Sea region where China's exerting its muscle. We believe it will include technological and knowledge transfers, high-level diplomatic outreach between the two countries. And it looks like Ukraine is seeking broader and deeper relations with the Philippines, whom it considers to be a reliable partner. And I think that's it for my top-line news stories for the day. So again, I want to thank our sponsor, Jeeps for Peace. You can find them on Facebook if you're on the Book of Faces. And I do encourage you to give them a follow. I want to thank Lars, who has the Discord server, Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces, and of course the best moderator team on the Tickety Talk, Jay, Travis, Pete, Maddie, and Feisty. Thank you all so much. Now, questions. We got about 14 minutes left. Questions, comments, points of observation. Ukraine has to look forward to the future in order to be innovative all the way. I agree, man. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Feisty. Well, Steve, you're not wrong to say that, right? Steve is saying that the first Russian bank has collapsed. And we are expecting bank collapses, but I'm not expecting those dominoes really to start to fall until December, right? When you have the December budget reconciliations and you can't hide the losses anymore. That's when I think we'll see a flurry of bank losses. I think it's important to remember that this bank was first bailed out in 2015. They've been having trouble for 10 years now. There was a second bailout, I want to say in 2019, something like that. So this is a small bank. We'd put it like in the 200 million depositor category. And they had some trouble with bad debt. And now it's finally caught up to them. And it is likely to be the first of many, Steve. I agree. Ukrainian IT attacks are improving. How long before F-16s over Crimea? It's a good question. The way that they've been taking out air defense and radars, it might not be that much longer. But I don't know. Hey, Ed. Hey, Bip. Are Russians using lower flying drones because Kremenchuk Bridge got hit hard? Well, my understanding, designology, is that they were flying them higher to avoid air defense. But I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that, and I don't know what the relationship to the bridge being hit would have to do. Governor said no more bailouts, huh? Well, they don't have the money. How are they going to bail anybody out when they don't have the money? David Frazier is very closely associated with Jeeps for Peace, Arn. That's how I know him, actually. Thanks, Ken. Where are Putin's billions hidden? Why can't the West go after his money? I don't have any idea where his billions are hidden. Are Crimea people satisfied to be under Russian rule and their economy? Well, the thing is that many of the Ukrainian nationals that were in Crimea at the time of the illegal annexation fled. They didn't want to stay there. They weren't going to stay there. So it was collaborators and now Russian colonists. 800,000 Russian colonists have been brought in and illegally sold the homes of the Ukrainians who ran away from the invasion. And they're all very happy to be Russian. They're all Russian, Not that any Russian is ever satisfied under any conditions. So many drones, so little supplies, supply lines, rail lines. Russia is doomed. Pistol Pete, you're a poet. Slightly off topic, football, soccer, Belarus 0, Scotland 2. Go Scotland! A better question, Seawolf, would be, why the fuck are you letting Belarus play? Barbarians don't get to enjoy or shouldn't get to enjoy the fruits of civilization. Football is a fruit of civilization. You shouldn't get to play if you won't play by the rules. Croatia 4, Montenegro 0. Go Croatia. I think I saw Kyiv here before. Go Croatia. Greece beat Belarus 5-1. Congratulations on Andy. George, come on. That is not the topic here. Keep your anti-Semitism to yourself. You don't like it? Get the fuck out. I don't need this. Akron found that funny. That's a great question. Is Russia worse off now than in 1986? I don't have the data available to answer that question specifically in any way. However, I do think that there are lots of parallels. Lots and lots of parallels. Certainly shortages of key materials inside the Russian Federation, a growing resentment among the population for what they're being asked to sacrifice for foreign wars. When all these angry, violent Russian soldiers go home, that's a recipe for revolution right there, which is one of the reasons why Putin cannot afford to have this war stop. He's got to make sure they all die in Ukraine. Is the air out, Peter? I don't know what that means, Nan. Is the air out of what? South Africa here. Thanks, Alita. After their meeting, has China, India, and others signaled or agreed to pick up supply to Russia? Russia and China are doing lots of business. India and Russia are doing lots of business. Trump and his tariffs have only seemed to have pushed India and Narendra Modi further into the China-Russia camp. He's certainly not doing us any favors, which completely makes sense to anybody paying attention. Apparently, part of the China deal is already Russian territory. I don't know what that means, TKS. I don't know what that means. Mart, if I knew what Trump's next actions would be, I would probably be a millionaire. Apparently more than the disputed borders are no longer disputed. I didn't see any territorial concessions come out of last week. I'm not saying that they haven't. I'm just unfamiliar with them. Andy says it right. We're not going to get any action out of Trump. He's certainly not going to do the right thing. That's for sure. If I could imagine the worst possible thing that he could do and then figure out a way to make it more bad for everybody, that would be the thing I would say. Hey, Jason Wills Starrin, how you doing, pal? I don't know anything about Russian plans, so I can't answer that question, designology. I do want to say we have just about 4 minutes left, so real quick, let me thank Jeeps for Peace, who is the sponsor of today's live. Let me thank Lars, who has the Discord server, Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group, and of course, the best moderators on the Tickety Talk. Thank you all. Hey, June, you're real late, pal. We're just about to wrap it up. It's the same time every fucking day. Ukraine has stopped offensives in Zaporizhia every week for the last 26 months. Just last week, we saw a very large armored column ambushed and decimated. Decimated in the modern sense, not the traditional Latin sense. Right? 90% destroyed, not 10% destroyed. Train man, Germany is not sending the Taurus. He can't do it. Merz can't get the political will inside Germany, and they are not sending them. So we got to give up that hope. And I would point out to everybody that Pugh Mahone called it way back when Merz was making it as a campaign promise. Pugh Mahone was very clear that he's in Germany, and he did not believe the political will existed to send them. And he was right. You wish the best Tuesday. What's going on Tuesday, Julian? Watching from Brazil, esse amor compaixão, ai que coisa. I love the Brazilians, Saxton. I'll take a flamingo. Damn right. Oh. He did, Pugh Mahone. He certainly convinced me. I was certainly convinced of it. But he's certainly come through in a lot of other ways, boy. He's good for Ukraine, I'd say so far, right? You think that's fair to say? Thanks, Subway Green. Thanks, Marius. Night, Anthony. Thanks, Jan. Okay, so guys, it's just about the top of the hour. Thank you to Jeeps for Peace. I am doing real good on the Sofia trip, I got to tell you. Little Red Sunflower will be our sponsor tomorrow night. And I bought my bus tickets to Warsaw. I got my plane ticket to Sofia. I got my conference registration fees paid. Now I'm looking to raise the money for the hotels. So if anybody can help with any of that, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you. So far, I think I got 3 sponsors. I got Christian, Ted, and Little Red are sponsoring the Sofia trip so far. I could certainly use some other sponsors if anybody can help with that. I would like to get that hotel booked as soon as possible because it's already the 8th and I fly out in 2 weeks. Wow. That's crazy. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear. I will see you all tomorrow night. Thanks. Take care.